Emily sat alone near the window in the back row of the music classroom. She was quiet, always kept her head down, and never raised her hand. Most students didn't even remember her name. To them, she was just the girl who barely spoke and always sat by herself. The teachers thought she wasn't serious. She didn't look like someone who belonged in a music school. But no one knew the truth, not yet. Emily had grown up in a poor family. They didn't have money for piano lessons. In fact, they didn't even have a real piano. Emily had learned to play on an old broken keyboard she found in a junk shop. It only had 42 keys, and many of them didn't work. Still, she taught herself by listening to classical music on the radio. She watched videos online when she could get free internet. She remembered every note she heard and practiced them again and again. At the music school, things were different. Everyone else had been trained since they were children. They spoke in musical terms, discussed famous composers, and shared private lessons. Emily stayed silent. Not because she didn't know, but because she was afraid no one would believe she learned everything by herself. She never told anyone that she played better by ear than she did by reading sheet music. One day, during class, the piano instructor asked for a volunteer to play. No one moved, so the teacher looked straight at Emily. "You, at the back," he said, firmly. "You haven't played anything yet." Emily froze, her heart beating fast. She didn't want to say no. She also didn't want to be laughed at if she failed. Slowly, she got up and walked to the grand piano. The classroom fell silent. A few students giggled quietly, expecting something bad. The teacher handed her a music sheet. It was a complicated piece far above beginner level. Emily's eyes scanned the paper, but her mind was racing. She had never read this piece before. Still, she had heard it once on the radio. A long time ago. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Then, she placed her fingers on the keys and started to play. At first, the room was filled with confusion. They expected her to struggle, to miss notes, to panic. But what they heard was something completely different. Her fingers moved with confidence and grace. The music flowed like water, each note perfect, each pause powerful. She was not reading the sheet anymore. She was remembering every note. In her mind, she didn't just play the song, she felt it. The students sat up, their expressions changing from amusement to shock. Even the teacher stood still, mouth slightly open. No one had expected this from the girl who never spoke. By the time Emily finished the piece, the room was completely silent. No one clapped. Not yet. They were still trying to understand what had just happened. Emily stood up slowly, her hands trembling. She thought maybe she had done something wrong. She looked at the teacher, who blinked and said, "Where did you learn to play like that?" Emily replied in a soft voice, "At home, by myself." There was silence again. But now it was different. Now they were looking at her with respect, even awe. One student whispered. "She's actually amazing," another said. "I thought she was just shy." "But wow." The teacher nodded slowly, clearly still surprised. "Well," he said finally, "I think we've all misjudged you." Emily sat back down quietly. She didn't smile or gloat. For her, the music was never about attention or praise. It was about escape, about peace, about something no one could take away from her. But that day, something changed. For the first time, people saw her not as a quiet, strange girl, but as someone special, someone with a gift. And deep down, Emily knew this was only the beginning. The next day, after her surprising performance, Emily came back to class early. She didn't expect anything different. She thought the teachers would forget what happened, just like before. But that morning, something had changed in the air. Students looked at her longer, curious, confused, even nervous. Some smiled awkwardly, while others whispered as she walked in. Emily kept her head low, still unsure if she had done something wrong or right. Then, The music teacher entered, holding a stack of music sheets. His face was unreadable, but his eyes went straight to Emily. "Emily," he said, "stay after class." A few students raised their eyebrows. Most thought she was in trouble again, but Emily nodded quietly and stayed silent. The lesson passed slowly. The teacher gave instructions and discussed theory. But many students were distracted. They kept glancing back at Emily, wondering what was going on when the bell rang. Everyone packed their bags and rushed out, but a few curious ones stayed behind. Pretending to organize their things, Emily stood, alone by the piano, heart beating fast. The teacher walked over and handed her a fresh piece of music. "I want you to play this," he said. "Right now." Emily looked at it, her fingers shaking slightly. It was a difficult piece, fast, technical, and full of complicated notes. It was something usually given to senior students. She had never seen it before, never heard it. "I don't know this one," Emily whispered. "I know," the teacher replied. "That's why this is a test." He folded his arms and stepped back, watching her. Others stood by the door, watching. Too, Emily took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. She looked at the keys, then at the sheet again. She could hear the doubt in their breathing. They didn't believe she could do it twice. Her fingers touched the first keys gently. She began slowly, trying to follow the written music, but something happened. She made a mistake. Then another. A few students outside snickered. Emily paused, her shoulders stiff, but instead of giving up, she closed her eyes. She didn't need the sheet. She had already seen the structure, the rhythm, the idea of the song. Now, she let her ears guide her, not her eyes. She started again, but this time, she didn't follow the paper. She played what she felt the music should sound like. And it was beautiful. Her fingers moved faster, more confident. The melody filled the room with energy, with soul. The students at the door slowly stepped in, drawn by the sound. The teacher's eyes widened as he listened. He knew she wasn't playing the sheet exactly, but somehow it was better. She was adding emotion, grace, and power that no one expected. It wasn't perfect in the traditional way. It was something Marit was real. When the last note faded, no one spoke for a moment. The silence was heavy, but not cold, was filled with respect. The teacher stepped forward and asked softly, "Where did you learn that?" Emily looked down. "I didn't," she said. "I just heard it in my head." One of the senior students who had laughed before now stepped forward. He looked embarrassed and said, "That wasn't normal, but it was amazing," he added quickly. Another girl nodded. She didn't play like a student. She played like a concert artist. The teacher scratched his head, still processing what he had witnessed. He looked at Emily with new eyes, not as a weak student, but as something else. "You don't read music well, do you?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "Not really, but your ear," he said slowly, "is perfect." "I practice at home," she said. "I listen and remember." The teacher smiled slightly. "Emily, what you did today, very few people in the world can do that." He wasn't angry. He wasn't mocking. For the first time, his voice was full of something else, admiration. The students finally clapped, not because they were told to, but because they had seen something rare, something powerful. A girl who had been invisible yesterday was now unforgettable. Emily didn't smile much, but in her heart, she felt a small light. Not because they clapped, but because, for the first time, someone listened not just to her music, but to her. And as she walked out of the classroom, the hallway didn't feel so long. The shadows didn't feel so cold. For the first time in her life, Emily believed maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. The next few days were strange for Emily. People who had never noticed her now watched her every move. Students whispered when she walked past, some in amazement, some in jealousy. Even the teachers who once looked at her with tired eyes now gave her Long stares filled with questions. Emily wasn't sure how to feel. She had never liked being the center of attention. She didn't play for praise. She played because it made her feel alive. But now, it seemed like everyone was waiting for her next move. The school announced a small performance day. Students were invited to show their talent in front of all the teachers and parents. It wasn't a big event, but for many, it was a chance to shine. Emily didn't plan to join at first, she thought. Maybe they had already seen enough, but her music teacher came to her desk one afternoon and gently said, "You should play something." She looked up, unsure. "You have a gift," he continued. "Don't hide it again." So, she agreed. She didn't choose something famous or flashy. Instead, she decided to play a song she had written herself. It was simple, calm, but full of emotion. It spoke of her journey being ignored, staying silent, and finding light through music. On the day of the performance, the auditorium was full. Teachers sat in the front row, holding clipboards. Parents smiled politely, chatting among themselves. The students were nervous, checking their clothes, tuning instruments, adjusting hair. Emily sat alone near the backstage curtain. She held her hands together, breathing slowly. Her name was far down the list, so she had time to listen. The other performers played well. Some sang, some played violin, others danced. The audience clapped after each one. When Emily's name was finally called, a strange hush fell over the room. People leaned in, curious to see if the rumors were true. "Is that the same quiet girl?" Someone whispered. "She's the one who played last week," another said. Emily walked slowly to the piano in the center of the stage. Her heart beat loudly in her chest, but her fingers felt steady. She sat down, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first few notes were soft, gentle, like a whisper. The room grew silent. Even the baby stopped crying as she played. Her emotions poured into the music, her pain, her memories, her small victories, her loneliness. Every note was a piece of her life, and everyone listening could feel it. They weren't just hearing a performance. They were hearing her soul speak. Some teachers looked up from their clipboards, eyebrows raised. Others leaned forward, as if drawn into a story with no words. One parent covered her mouth in surprise, tears forming in her eyes. The headmaster, usually serious and hard to impress, crossed his arms and nodded slowly. Emily didn't rush. She didn't try to impress anyone with speed or showy tricks. She played like someone who had waited her whole life for this moment, and when she reached the last note, she held it gently, then let it go. The hall remained silent for a moment. Then a wave of claps exploded from the crowd, loud, real, and filled with emotion. Some people stood up, clapping harder. Emily looked around, confused at first. Then she slowly stood and bowed, her cheeks red. She wasn't used to this kind of attention backstage. Even the other students who had ignored her now spoke kindly. "That was amazing." One said, "You wrote that yourself." Another asked, eyes wide. Emily nodded quietly, still feeling overwhelmed. Later that day, the teachers gathered to discuss the performances. When Emily's name came up, one of them said, "I misjudged her." Another added, "She has something rare, something honest." Even the headmaster said, "She's not just a student, she's an artist." From that day on, everything changed for Emily. She was no longer invisible, but more importantly, she was no longer afraid to be seen. And as she walked through the school halls the next morning, heads turned not in pity, but in respect. People moved aside to let her pass, because now they knew she wasn't just the quiet girl in the back row. She was the hidden genius they almost missed. Emily sat under a tree outside the music school, her bag on her lap and her fingers softly tapping a rhythm only she could hear. People had started treating her differently now. Teachers smiled more, and students spoke kindly. But even with all this attention, something inside her felt heavy. They were seeing her talent now, yes, but none of them knew what it had cost her to reach this point. No one knew her real story, her real struggle. They saw a gifted girl on a piano, not the broken keys and broken nights that shaped her back home. Life wasn't easy. Emily lived with her mother in a small apartment above a bakery. Her father had passed away when she was very young. Her mother worked 2 jobs cleaning houses in the morning and waiting tables at night. They never had money for lessons or even a full meal sometimes. Their furniture was old, their walls cracked, and the heater only worked sometimes in the winter. But in one corner of that small apartment sat her treasure-on old keyboard. Found in a junkyard, half the keys broken, no power cord. Emily had fixed it using tape, wires, and a battery pack from an old radio. She had no teacher, so she taught herself. She learned by watching others on public internet in the library. She would write down everything she saw: finger, placement, rhythm, scales. Then she would go home and practice until her fingers were sore. Her fingers had bled sometimes from pressing so hard she didn't have soft keys or padded benches, just hard plastic and determination. And when she made mistakes, she didn't cry. She just tried again, over and over, until it sounded right in her heart. Sometimes, when she played late at night, the bakery owner downstairs would bang on the ceiling with a broom. Emily would stop, wait a few minutes, then keep going, only softer. She never told anyone at school about this. She didn't want pity. She just wanted a chance. Now, after her performance, the doors seemed to be opening slowly, but she still felt like she was hiding a big part of herself. One afternoon, as she was packing her things, her teacher approached her again. "You're different, Emily," he said gently. "Where did you really learn to play like that?" Emily hesitated, then smiled shyly from a broken keyboard in a noisy apartment. The teacher looked confused at first, thinking it was a joke, but when he saw her eyes, he understood it was real. "Would you show me sometime?" he asked. Carefully, Emily nodded. "Okay, but it's not a fancy place." "I don't care about fancy," he replied. "I care about truth." The next weekend, he visited her home. He sat quietly on a wobbly chair while Emily pulled out her keyboard. From under her bed, she sat on the floor and began to play. It wasn't perfect. The sound was a little off. Some keys didn't work, but the music was alive. And the teacher felt something he hadn't felt in years: pure emotion, raw beauty, unshaped by rules. After she finished, he stood up, tears in his eyes. "You don't need fixing, Emily," he said. "You just need support." That day, he promised to help her not just in school, but beyond. He helped her apply for grants and introduced her 2 music mentors who could guide her further. Emily felt nervous, even scared. What if the world outside judged her for her past? What if they looked at her broken keyboard and laughed? But slowly, she began to believe that maybe her story wasn't a shameful one. Maybe her struggle was the reason her music touched hearts, because every note she played carried truth, not just talent, but fight, pain, love, and hope. One night, as she sat alone by the window, looking at the stars, she whispered to herself, "You made it this far." And in her heart, she knew she hadn't just survived. She had created beauty from broken pieces, and that was her real power. Emily walked into school the next week feeling something she wasn't used to: confidence, not pride, not ego, just a quiet belief that she belonged there. The girl who once sat silently in the back row was now greeted with nods, smiles, and even waves. Students who had never spoken to her before now wanted to sit near her. Some asked her questions about music. Others just wanted to hear her play. But Emily stayed the same: humble, soft-spoken, and focused. Her teacher invited her to play again during class. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked to the piano with calm steps and played a new song, something gentle, filled with emotion. It was another piece she had written herself, and when she finished, Even the students who once mocked her clapped loudly. Emily's talent was no longer a rumor. It was real, and everyone could feel it. Word started spreading outside the classroom, too. Another music teacher from a different department came to listen, then another, soon. They were inviting her to perform in other classes. She was asked to join a small recital for senior students. At first, Emily felt nervous again, but her teacher said, "They want to hear you because you speak through your music." So, she agreed. At the recital, many students performed, some with expensive instruments, some with years of private training, but when it was Emily's turn, the room went silent. She played a piece that didn't have a title. She had written it the night before. The music told a story, one that didn't need words. It spoke of loneliness, of hope, of light shining in dark places. And when she finished, many in the audience had tears in their eyes. After the recital, something new happened. Teachers started approaching her with serious interest. One asked if she had ever considered composing music professionally. Another offered to help her record her work in a real studio. One teacher said quietly, "I've taught for 20 years, and I've never seen a gift like yours." Emily didn't know how to react. All this attention felt strange, but it also felt good, not because of fame, but because her music was finally being seen, being understood. She began working harder than ever after school. She practiced for hours sometimes until her fingers hurt. But this time, she had help. The school gave her permission to use one of the real pianos in the music hall after hours. It felt like a dream. Each note sounded more alive than on her old keyboard at home. Her classmates started treating her differently too. Even those who once laughed behind her back now spoke with respect. One student said, "Emily, you're going to be famous one day." Another asked, "Can you teach me how to put feelings into my playing like you do?" Emily would always smile politely and say, "Just play what's in your heart." But even with the attention and support, Kay stayed true to herself. She never tried to outshine others. She didn't care about being no pentiously. She didn't care about being no pentiously, a long-lasting color. Emily would always smile politely and say, "Be Mali. Ohf, me no s. Me no s, Maya noe. Me noe, by sai. Me noe, you just busy to be realize it. It's a core me playlist at it, lisa lie it. The sorotata is it beclay it be prick you I you be cod." The best, she just wanted to share her music. One day, the headmaster of the school called her into his office. Emily sat down nervously, her hands folded in her lap. But the headmaster smiled and said, "You've brought something special to this school." He explained that he had spoken to a National Music Foundation about her. They wanted to hear her play. It was a small event, but many important people would be there: musicians, producers, composers. Emily listened quietly, unsure if this was real. "You have something the world needs to hear," the headmaster added. Emily nodded slowly, her heart full of emotion. That night, she went home and told her mother. Her mother, tired from a long shift, sat down and listened with wide eyes. Tears rolled down her cheeks as Emily told her everything. "I knew you were special," her mother whispered. "I just didn't know the world would see it too." Emily held her mother's hand and said, "You're the reason I never gave up." And in that moment, Emily didn't feel like a student or a performer. She felt like a daughter who finally made her mother proud. The recognition had begun, but Emily knew this was just the start of something bigger. Her dream was no longer locked inside an old keyboard. It was growing note by note, heart by heart, and, for the first time in her life, she believed the world was ready to listen. Emily was practicing alone in the music hall when her teacher walked in with a letter in his hand. He looked serious, but also excited. She stopped playing and looked at him, her hands still resting on the piano keys. "You've been invited," he said with a smile. Emily blinked, unsure what he meant. The teacher continued, a national level. Music producer is visiting our school's event next month. He heard about you, he added, and he wants to hear you play live. Emily's heart skipped a beat. A producer? From outside the school. Someone from the real music world. She couldn't believe it, but why me? She asked softly. The teacher nodded. Because your music speaks to people, Emily. You don't just play notes, you tell a story. The news spread quickly. Students started treating Emily like a star. Some were genuinely happy for her. Others showed jealousy but stayed quiet. Teachers reminded her to prepare well, to not waste this once-in-a-lifetime chance. But inside, Emily was nervous. She had never played in front of someone that important. What if she made a mistake? What if she froze on stage? She tried to push the fear away. She remembered what her mother always told her. Courage doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you don't let fear stop you. So Emily began to prepare. She wrote a new piece. Just for the event, something that came from deep inside. It was about struggle, pain and hope, about being invisible. Then, finally being seen, she played it over and over, changing small parts, perfecting each note. The school gave her special time in the soundproof room with a grand piano. It was the best instrument she had ever touched. The keys were smooth, the sound was rich. She would close her eyes and imagine telling her life story through the music. No words, no speeches, just sound. One night, she stayed in the music room. Long after dark, her teacher quietly watched from the doorway. He didn't say a word. He could see the emotion on her face. This wasn't practice anymore. This was a girl pouring out her soul. The week before the event, Emily's nerves grew stronger. She dreamed of forgetting the notes on stage, of people laughing at her. But when she woke up each morning, she still went to the piano, still practiced with focus and heart. Her classmates noticed her dedication. One of them, a boy named Jordan, who used to mock her, came to her with a small smile. "I'm sorry for how I treated you before," he said. "I thought you were just quiet because you had nothing to offer." Emily looked at him and nodded. "It's okay," she said. "You weren't wrong to think that, because I never gave anyone a reason to think otherwise." "But now you do," Jordan replied, "and it's beautiful." Finally, the day of the event arrived. The auditorium was full. Parents, teachers, students, and guests from outside had come to watch. And in the front row sat the music producer, a sharp-dressed man with gray hair and kind eyes. He held a notebook in his lap, but didn't write anything. He simply watched. Emily sat backstage, her heart pounding in her chest. Her fingers trembled, but her mind repeated one thing. "You're ready?" She whispered it like a spell, over and over. "You're ready," when her name was called. She walked onto the stage. The lights were bright. The crowd was silent. She sat down at the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first note was soft, almost a whisper. Then the music swelled gently. Each chord carried emotion, grief, longing, strength, and quiet joy. It was not just a performance. It was a memory, a confession, a journey. People in the audience leaned forward. Even the producer, who had seen hundreds of performers, seemed moved. He didn't take his eyes off her. Emily didn't look at the crowd. She was inside the music, seeing the old apartment, the broken keyboard. The nights she cried but didn't stop. She played it all. She let the music speak for her, and the piano became her voice when the final note faded into the air. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then a wave of applause broke out. People stood to their feet, cheering, clapping, some with tears in their eyes. Emily stood slowly and bowed. Her eyes scanned the front row. The producer was clapping too. His face thoughtful and serious. She walked off stage quietly, but her heart was full. She had done it, not for the applause, not for the attention, but because she finally had a chance to show the world her real self. Emily sat in the hallway, her hands resting on her lap. The lights were still bright on stage, but her moment was over. Her performance had ended, yet her heart was still beating fast. The applause echoed in her ears, and she could still feel the piano keys under her fingers. But now came the waiting. Would anything change? Did it even matter to the producer? All she had done was tell her story through music, the only way she knew how. A few minutes later, her music teacher came running backstage. His face was glowing with pride. He didn't say anything right away. He just hugged her. "I've never been so proud," he finally whispered. "You didn't just perform." "Emily, you moved them," she nodded, holding back tears. "I just played what I felt." She replied softly. Soon, others came to congratulate her. Students, teachers, even some parents, some people she had never even met, walked up and said things like, "You have a rare gift. I've never heard anything like that before. You're going to go far." But the most surprising moment came when the music producer himself approached her. He didn't bring an assistant or a camera. Just a gentle smile. "Emily," he said, "do you know what you did out there?" She shook her head slowly, unsure of how to answer. "You reminded everyone what music is supposed to be," he said. "Not perfect notes, not fancy techniques, just truth." He asked her where she had trained. She told him the truth about the old keyboard, the apartment, the nights spent learning alone. The producer looked stunned. "You learned all this without a formal teacher?" She nodded. "I watched, I listened, I practiced." He chuckled, but his eyes were serious. "You don't just play music," he said. "You are music." He gave her his card and said, "If you ever want to record your own album, call me, Emily." Stared at the card like it was a dream, but the card was real. The moment was real. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time, doors were opening, real doors. Big ones. Back at school the next day, Emily was no longer the shy girl in the corner. She was still quiet, still humble. But now, people looked at her with respect, not confusion. Other students asked to sit near her. Some just wanted to hear her talk about music, some wanted advice, and Emily gave it freely. Always kind, always honest. Her teachers started using her as an example in class. One said, "You don't need to be rich or famous to be great. Look at Emily." Another told students, "If you want to know what real passion sounds like, just listen to her play." But through all the praise and change, Emily remained grounded. She still helped clean up the classroom when no one asked. She still brought lunch from home in a small paper bag. She still visited the library after school to write music and study quietly. Her mother was more proud than ever. Each night, they would sit on the couch, and Emily would play soft tunes for her. Sometimes they didn't even speak. They just listened to the music. And in those quiet moments, everything felt perfect. All the struggles, all the pain, all the late nights had brought them to this point. And they were finally okay. Weeks passed, but the effect of her performance did not fade. One day, a letter came to the school addressed to Emily. It was from a National Arts Foundation. They had heard about her performance from the producer and wanted to offer her a scholarship, full support to continue her studies, access to better instruments, and even travel for competitions. Emily read the letter over and over, her hands shaking. She ran home to show her mother, who cried while holding it. "This is what you deserve," her mother said. "The world is finally catching up to what I've always known." Emily knew this was just the beginning. It hadn't reached the end of her journey, only the start of a bigger one. But now, she had something she had never truly felt before: belief in herself. Her performance was more than a moment. It was a message. To every quiet girl in the back of the room, to every kid with a broken instrument and a big dream, to every person who was told they weren't enough, Emily proved that genius doesn't need permission. It just needs a chance. The morning sunlight came through the window as Emily sat at her small wooden desk. In front of her lay the scholarship letter, still neatly folded and carefully placed. Beside it was the card from the music producer who believed in her. She had looked at both so many times, and still, it felt unreal. She ran her fingers over the keyboard in front of her. The same broken one she had started with, only now. It wasn't a symbol of her limits, it was proof of her journey. Life had changed. But Emily remained the same kind-hearted, quiet girl who loved music more than anything else. The school was preparing a farewell ceremony for her. She would be leaving soon to attend a professional conservatory under a full scholarship. It wasn't just a new school. Lit was a world-class place where artists from around the globe studied. The idea of being in that place both excited and scared her. But deep inside, she knew she was ready. Her teachers gathered to say goodbye one by one. Even the strictest ones who once doubted her stood up to speak. "You reminded us," one of them said, "that raw talent can't be ignored just because it doesn't look polished." "You made this school proud," another added, "but more importantly, you reminded all of us why we love music." Students surrounded her after class, some asking her to sign their notebooks, some just hugged her and said, "Thank you." Even Jordan, who once used to tease her, said, "Your story gave me hope. You can make it. Maybe I can too." Emily smiled and said, "You can. Just don't. Stop believing in yourself at home." Her mother packed her bag with slow hands. She folded each shirt, each item, as if preparing her daughter for something much bigger than a trip. "You're going to shine, Emily," her mother whispered, "but don't forget where you started." "I won't," Emily promised, holding her tightly. "I carry it all." With my end every song the night before she left. Emily sat by the window with her notebook. She began writing a new piece. It wasn't sad, nor dramatic. It was full of warmth and quiet strength. It was called A New Beginning, because that's what it was. Her story of silence had become a story of sound. And this was just the next chapter when she arrived at the conservatory. Everything felt different. New buildings, new faces, new expectations. But instead of hiding, she walked in with her head high. She was no longer the invisible girl. She was the pianist who had earned her place through pure determination. Professors greeted her by name. Students who had heard about her performance introduced themselves with curiosity and kindness. She wasn't just a student, she was an inspiration. And Emily didn't disappoint. She practiced with more heart than ever. She studied theory, learned new instruments, collaborated with other artists, and wrote songs that made even the most serious professors smile. One of her pieces was chosen to be performed by the school orchestra. It was a moment Emily never imagined, hearing her own composition played by a full group of skilled musicians. When the last note rang out, the audience gave her a standing ovation, and this time, Emily allowed herself to smile a little wider. Months passed. One day she received a letter from the music producer who had first seen her at school. He invited her to record a small album, just 5 songs, all written by her. She accepted with both fear and excitement. The studio felt like another world. Professional sound equipment, talented engineers, perfect instruments. But when she sat down at the piano, she closed her eyes and remembered the cold floor of her old apartment, the broken keys, the hunger, the doubt, and then she began to play. Her album was called From Silence. And when it was released online, it touched thousands of people. Not because it was famous or flashy, but because every note was honest. People wrote messages saying her music helped them through grief, loneliness, and dark times. Emily read every message with tears in her eyes. She had never imagined her music would travel so far. She returned to her old school 1 year later. Not to show off, but to say thank you. She gave a small performance for the new students, and, after playing, she looked into the crowd and said, "If you feel invisible, if you feel like you don't belong, don't give up. Because I was you once," she continued. "And someone finally gave me a chance. So give yourself a chance too. The room was quiet, and a few students nodded with tears. They had just heard more than music, they had heard truth. Emily's journey had begun with silence, but now her voice echoed through concert halls, through headphones, through hearts. She had become more than a pianist. She had become a symbol of what is possible when talent is matched with courage, and when the world is finally willing to listen.